Hello, everyone. My name is Heather Smith, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Specialist at the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio, and today we are going to be talking about identity. The Diversity Center is a nonprofit organization dedicated to eliminating bias, bigotry, and racism. We have two main branches, our School and Youth Division, which works with students, educators, and administrators, and our Professional Services Division, Shift Consulting, which works with nonprofit, for-profit, and public sector organizations. We provide programming, professional development, culture and climate survey, strategic planning, and more to help schools and organizations create communities where everyone is connected, respected, and valued. If you are interested in following us on social media, you can find us at diversity_NEO on all major platforms. Diversity refers to differences between people, things, and experiences. One aspect that makes up diversity is the identities that people hold. So let's talk about what identity is and where it comes from. A person's identity is comprised of all of the experiences and affiliations that a person has with particular groups or circumstances. Each and every one of us has at least one identity, and we'll have an opportunity to explore this more in a moment. But where does identity come from, and how do we come to understand ourselves within physical, developmental, or historical circumstances? That brings us to the concept of culture. Culture can be defined as the shared values and ways of doing things based on history, experiences, and circumstances that exist within groups. It can include food, language, and location, but also the written and unwritten expectations in a group or society at large. Culture consists of learned behaviors and shared beliefs. For example, culture tells us what is acceptable in your industry, school, or community. Acceptable meaning a behavior or action that is widely understood, expected, and socially enforced. In much of the United States, the dominant culture celebrates weddings by the bride wearing white and the groom wearing a suit, having both a ceremony and a reception, and giving gifts. Other cultures may celebrate weddings differently, if they have them at all. LGBTQIA plus couples may not have a bride and a groom, which is a shift from the dominant culture. Jewish couples may choose to fast on their wedding day. If we attend a wedding that is from a culture different from ours, we might find ourselves unsure of how to behave or what is expected of us. Now, because of the impact that culture has on us, culture contributes to the foundation for self-identity community affiliation. The behaviors we learn, beliefs we adopt, and values we hold onto or practice often relate back to our connection to or with varying communities, based on experiences we've had or things we've learned or seen over the course of our lives. It is important to remember that all identities have and are connected to a culture, which can mean that people have very rich and interesting lives based on their backgrounds, experiences, circumstances, and the interests they've pursued. So let's talk more about that and see what we can learn or discover about identity. At the Diversity Center, we recognize that sometimes people only consider things like race, gender, age, or disability when they think about diversity and identity. We use this diagram with our audiences as a reminder of the many and varied components that contribute to a person's identity, and therefore the wide range of experiences people have. A person's affiliation or identification and connection with a group can be related to any of the following dimensions. Our internal dimension contains identities that are inherent to us and who we are. These are things that are only minorly influenced by external forces. These identities may include physical, mental, or developmental aspects of our personhood that contribute to who we are, like our gender, our race, personality, and more. Our community dimension includes identities that are related to our relationships with others. Our religion or spiritual practice, our political affiliation, and our education are things we learn and or adopt and can change in some instances. We may hold some of these identities close to our heart, or we may not consider them much. Our social life experiences dimension contains identities that are directly impacted by external factors. These are things we may not necessarily choose to be a part of, but that occur and may or may not become integral to the way we see or interact with the world. The COVID-19 pandemic was a world event that significantly impacted the way many people in the world interacted with one another. We socially distanced, isolated, wore face masks, and adopted new patterns of operating because of this world event. Lastly, our organizational dimension includes identities specific to the organizations we are a part of, like the department we're in, our years in the organization, leadership status, and more. These are unique to our school, workplace, and other institutions we inhabit, but do impact our experiences and the way we approach decisions in our everyday lives. We're going to engage in activity that will give us the opportunity to see all of the components that contribute to diversity in groups and identity for individuals. After we run through an example, take a moment to pause this video on the identity diagram. You will use this diagram to write down any or all of the identity categories that you think about. What identities are you aware of when you walk into the room with lots of people? Are there aspects of your identity you consider when you leave the house? Are there experiences that have impacted you, either positively or negatively, that you think about often or hold an awareness of? I'll run through what my identity diagram looks like first, and then you'll be able to consider your own identities. This is my identity diagram. I identify with the LGBTQIA plus community and I live with my partner, so I've circled sexual orientation and relationship status. I also have world events circled. Like we talked about, the COVID-19 pandemic influenced how I operate in the world. I now make sure I have a mask wherever I go and that I'm up to date on my vaccine. One thing I want to note is that all of these different identities can interact with one another as well. If you are an international student, you may find it difficult to choose whether education or nationality better represents that identity. Good news is, you don't have to. This is your diagram, and you can list what you see fit. I personally have both gender and sex circled because I'm a cisgender woman. Cisgender meaning my gender identity aligns with the one I was assigned at birth based on the physical appearance of my anatomy. And both my gender and sex inform that identity of mine. Now you can pause the video to list out which identity categories you consider in your life, those that most influence how you see and interact with the world. Now that you have your list of identity categories, for the next portion of the activity, I'd like you to draw a circle about the size of your fist on a piece of paper. Using some or all of the identities you listed, create a pie chart that quantifies how much you consider or think about those identities. The identity wheel is a personal reflection that helps you consider the parts of your identity that most influence how you see the world, how you move through the world, and how you make decisions based on what is most important to you. You will use the identities you listed to create a visual representation and use different size slices to represent the importance of your identities in your everyday life. I'll go over my example now. My largest slice is that I identify as queer. The reason it is so large is because I live with my partner, and by virtue of us being in the LGBTQIA plus community, I think about my queerness. It is also this large because of how often I must think about it. Whether having beer bottles thrown at us out of a car window or assessing risk before we hold hands in public, being queer is something I need to consider while I'm interacting with the world around me. I also have being plus size on my wheel from my appearance identity being circled on my diagram. Being plus size is something I think about a lot. When stores don't have sizes up to mine, or when I don't see my body type represented in ad campaigns, I'm thinking about my body and how it is perceived by both myself and other people. From my hobbies and interests identity, I have being crafty and handy. I pride myself in being someone who enjoys building IKEA furniture and taking on DIY projects I have no business taking on. I identify as a crafty and a handy person. Now you'll notice I don't have slices for being white or being American. I didn't circle those things on my diagram. This is because I don't have to think about those identities of mine very often, if at all. I'm not negatively impacted by being white. I can walk through a grocery store without being suspected of stealing. I don't have to consider my being American either, because I live in America and it's assumed that I was born here. No one asks where I'm from. It's important to note this is my identity wheel at this moment in time. Our identity wheels can change as our identities change. I'm not a parent now, but I will be someday. And when I am, that's going to be a pretty large slice on my wheel. We love this activity because it's a great reflection to revisit over time. You'll find that your identity, what is most important to you, and what influences you can change over time depending on any number of circumstances. You can pause the video now to create your own identity wheel before moving on. Now that you've completed your identity wheel, you can consider these questions as you reflect. How was it to complete this activity and to think about your identities? And how can understanding your own social identity support you in your interactions with others? The identity diagram shows how many components are included in diversity, which shape a person's experiences and perceptions of the world. We all have social identities that we experience in our own unique ways. We are likely to be more aware of the parts of our identities that have been targeted, used to harm us and make things more difficult. When interacting with others, we may not be aware of the parts of their identity that matter most or influence their thinking the most. We may make assumptions about what others' big and small slices are, but we can't know for certain unless they themselves tell us. We do this exercise because it's a great reminder for naming what is important to us as individuals, and our reflection on the activity helps us develop more awareness about differences and similarities in our experiences. This individual perspective-taking exercise encourages us to practice empathy as a key piece for inclusion. With that, we want to thank you for exploring your own identity alongside us in this video. If you would like to learn more about the Diversity Center, you can visit us at diversitycenterneo.org. Thank you.